This episode is brought to you by Octopus Energy.
Now, it is awards season. Everyone is wondering who's going to clean up. And we tend to think awards are about that one big moment, like, oh my goodness, that one night, that speech, I can't believe I've won. But
the effort that goes into winning an award.
Everyone going for one of those big movie awards, it's not a coincidence that Academy members or whatever are saying, oh, did you see that thing? Yeah, I did. It was really good. There is a remorseless, many months campaign, and there are tens of people working on every single film's awards campaign.
I thought you were going to say tens of thousands.
No.
But there are tens.
Yeah, there are tens. But that's quite a lot when you think of like one, and it's a full-time job.
We mention this only because we are announcing our presenting partnership with the lovely people at Octopus Energy, who have just won the Which Recommended Provider of the Year for the 9th time in a row. And that is not something you get just by...
Which is hard to win.
Which is hard to win.
Which is hard to win.
But 9 in a row, I would say that makes Octopus Energy the Meryl Streep of the business.
Oh, yeah, they're the Meryl. They're the absolute... They're the Meryl.
I call them Meryl Energy. That's what I call them.
Hello and welcome to this episode of The Rest is Entertainment, Questions and Answers edition. I'm Marina Hyde.
And I'm Richard Osman. Good day, everybody. Good day, Marina.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, really well. I'm so up for some questions.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I'm in answer mode.
I'm going right in with one on Taskmaster.
We're not like no pleasantries.
Well, we've just had some pleasantries.
Yes,
you said
have.
I'm in question mode.
Do you know what? You're absolutely right. That's on me.
Proceed straight to questions.
Yeah,
okay.
Proceed straight to questions. When this is AI, that's literally, we'll start it. I'll go proceed straight to questions.
This is AI. I haven't done the show for weeks.
You know what? I thought you were getting better.
Right, Richard. Mark would like to ask something about Taskmaster. How do they film the tasks in Taskmaster? Do they film all the tasks with each contestant over one day, or do they focus on filming all the contestants doing a particular task on a particular day?
I think that's a very astute question, because in any other form of television, you would absolutely set up the one task and have everybody do that task at the same time, because the cameras are set up, you've got a location or whatever it is. And so you would always do that. But Taskmaster, absolutely, that is not what they do. And the reason they don't is they don't really want you to meet at any point before you go into the studio. So you'll be filming Taskmaster tasks for maybe... I mean, I did an early series where you did fewer tasks, but I maybe did 8 days of filming, and
it's a lot, isn't it?
It is quite a lot, yeah. But you then wait.
I always think it when I'm watching it. This is
these days they must do absolutely loads.
Yeah.
I mean, I had it easy. I get all the glamour of Taskmaster without having to do most of the hard work. So you film maybe sort of 8 days worth of tasks. You then wait a couple of months because everything has to be edited and put into order, and other people have to do theirs before you go into the studio and you watch it all on that big screen. But they do not have people doing them at the same time. Purely that thing of they don't want you to talk to your fellow contestants at any point about it. And actually everyone's very, very good about that. So, in the kind of 2 months leading up to my Taskmaster, I know John Richardson fairly well, and anytime we would meet, we would be like, we mustn't say anything about what we've done. Even when you've just done a task where you've done disastrously badly, and all you want to do is say, oh my God, can you believe that thing when we met the mayor? Yeah. Was that the worst thing you've ever done in your life? So you would do 8 days, and on that day, so you might be down at the Taskmaster house, and you would do 4 or 5 tasks on the same day. So it would be venue based, really. So you will go along, you'll sit in the tiny little dressing room, and then at some point there will be a knock on the door, and you'll be like, oh no, and it'll be lovely Andy Cartwright or Andy Devonshire, and they'll say, okay, Richard, are you ready? And you go, well, not really, because I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no idea where you're taking me. Are you ready? Yes, sure, I'm ready. And then you walk into a room, and there'll be like some contraption there. And you're like, oh no. And then there'll be Alex Horne, and he'll say, hello, Richard. And you're like, I've said before, it's my least favourite bit of Taskmaster is I really, really like Alex so much. But when you walk into a room and you want to just talk to him, and he's in, Taskmaster assistant mode, and you go, oh, everything's on the task. And you go, no, Alex, I just wanted to talk to you about how are you? Have you had a nice day? What did you have for breakfast? He'll go, we're doing a task. And no, this is awful. It's like sort of, if you got like, there'd be people here who've had distant parents.
Yeah.
And it feels exactly like that, which is all I want is the love of my father.
Yeah. I'm getting the task yips. I
And
can't, I don't know if I can do this.
And I'm not getting it. So you will do it that way around, is the truth. So, each person, so I'll do a day where I do 6 tasks. Then, the next day, John Richardson will do a day where he does 6 tasks. And so they will stagger it in that way. But no, it's not one of those ones where, the moment I've knocked a toy fox out of a tree, Joe Wilkinson comes and tries to knock the same fox out of the same tree. I would not see Joe or Catherine Ryan, who was in mine, or Doc Brown, who was in mine, or John, at any point before we go into the studio, apart from when you do the group tasks. And when you do the group tasks, that's like my favourite bit because there is a sort of weird loneliness to it. You have to trust the process.
It's a form of madness, yeah.
A little bit, and you definitely trust the team because they're brilliant, and so many tasks are so good. Some of them you're like, ugh. So you absolutely trust that they know what they're doing. Secondly, it is better if you haven't discussed it with the others. You know for a fact that it is better if you don't. But you go in there, you are by yourself, you walk into a room, you're surrounded by, this crew just going, what's this guy going to be doing? This is going to be amazing. And you are by yourself at all times. But that's why that show is so great, because you get the joy of that show is firstly seeing different people doing the same thing in different ways, but seeing people's absolute first reaction to their competitors doing something much better than them, or doing something much worse than them, or finding a cheat that you could have done that would have saved you so much time. A question for you, AI Marina, from Georgia Cook. Georgia says, I have a question about bath scenes in TV shows and films. How are those actually filmed? There are usually lots of bubbles, so I'm curious whether there's some kind of synthetic foam or blanket prop that can be arranged for coverage, or if the tub is really filled with water. If it is real water, how do productions keep actors warm when multiple takes are needed? Okay,
very good, Georgia. No, there is no such thing as like a sort of synthetic bath bubble carpet that they kind of lay on top of a bath.
There should be.
Well, for various reasons, which I'll get to, you don't actually need that. But in terms of if there are bubbles, if sometimes there are not bubbles in bath scenes, they always have to, because the actor will be in and out of the bath a lot of times during the takes. They'll always like mark on the side of the bath where it.
That's
where it
an impossibility.
No, just the water. That's if there's no bubbles, right?
So, there's no bubbles.
That's if there's no bubbles.
That is not an impossibility.
And actually, what actors will tell you is that, funnily enough, as long as the room is warm, that's the problem. So they often will have so many heaters and everyone else will be really sweating, because it doesn't particularly, you don't have to keep putting hot water in. I mean, if there are really long scenes done in a bath, they may find ways, this has happened, they find ways of sort of heating the tub so it sort of stays warm. But in general, people will tell you it's the outside temperature that really gets you. So in terms of bubbles, if you go and watch that scene, do you remember in The Big Short where they, like Margot Robbie, the financial crisis, the people who shorted that, and so when they want someone to explain sort of subprime loans and all sorts of things like that, they get Margot Robbie in a bathtub to do it. And she's sitting there. She said it was one of her greatest days of filming ever.
Oh, really?
They gave her vintage champagne all day. It took about half a day in some house in Malibu. The one thing I will say about bubbles is that they're one of the easier things to kind of make look the same in post. People aren't...
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is not a sort of very detailed piece of CGI to do. So you can make it look the same and the bubbles kind of move a bit, or you can just make them look the same.
So you can just take bubbles from here and put them on
there.
You
can do that.
You can join bubbles together really easily.
You can join bubbles together. Bathroom scenes in general are very, very interesting, and why we have them. There's something about they're sort of, the bathroom is a sort of taboo space. It's supposed to be a place of safety, which is why they're often in horror movies.
Yeah.
In fact, you couldn't show it. Psycho is really shocking, not because of everything that happened to poor old Janet Leigh in the shower, but because they showed a loo for the first time ever in film, because it was in the bathroom, and even more wild, she flushed it. So she throws something down it anyway. But that's one thing. Obviously, they're sort of sexual as well, the sort of promise of what lies beneath in the, that's why Margot Robbie's there with all her bubbles like that. But there is a huge amount of the idea of vulnerability. It's almost always, there's terror, you're stuck, you're or opulence. There's Al Pacino. I went back and thought, I must have a quick look at this bath scene. Like Al Pacino in Scarface has a huge bath with a lot of bubbles. But actually, the bubbles don't move that much.
Okay.
And they wouldn't have had the same post-production techniques then. So they're slightly better at staying the bubbles than you think. But it's the water level and it's the cold that gets people. And so they almost always the crew will be sweating while you're filming one of those scenes.
And it's incredibly hard to film in a real bathroom, firstly, because they're quite small. And secondly, there's loads of mirrors everywhere. And the mirror is the...
they almost always construct it. And if you see how they do it, they almost always construct it. And that's another reason why it's absolutely freezing, because it's in a drafty studio. And the thing about all sound stages that I've ever been on is they have two speeds. Either you are absolutely freezing and you're like in a refrigerator box, or suddenly it will get to April and you'll be so boiling, and that's it. There was never a temperate 5 minutes. It will just switch over one day and the temperature will never be right. So they have to, but they adjust it all for the actors.
It'd be worth talking at some point to a cinematographer about mirror shooting, because occasionally you'll see films you think it is an impossibility that I'm seeing that angle of that person in that mirror without seeing the camera that is filming that person in that mirror.
Typically, many times, I agree. It's it's very, very, we'll do that. If anyone wants to ask about mirrors, we can talk about that another time. We've got a question from Lux Adams, who says, on my recommendation, Lux has been reading Lunches with Orson, which is a fantastic book, which is about Henry Jaglom, the film producer and director, used to have lunch with Orson Welles towards the end of his life, and he just recorded them all and then eventually published the tapes as transcripts. Anyway, Orson Welles said in one of those lunches that he hated biographies because he said, I don't want to keep hearing that Dickens was a lousy son of a bitch. I'm very glad I don't know anything about Shakespeare as a man. Do you agree, says Lux, are actors, directors and writers better off as enigmas?
That's like a think piece question, isn't it? Firstly, great name.
Yes.
Lux. Yes, I think sometimes, I was reading some Philip Larkin the other day.
Yeah.
And you can pick all sorts of different articles at Larkin that will tell you he's the worst man in the world or he wasn't the worst man in the world. And I choose to only read those ones that tell me that he was okay.
Yeah.
Because that must mean that it affects me if I'm reading his work, if I think that, he was a difficult or irascible or troublesome character. His work resonates more with me if I feel there's some fellow feeling. So I think in general, and when you work in television particularly, there are some programs which are spoiled because some of the people who do it, and
in telly a lot.
You've had issues with them where you think that they don't treat people well or something like that, and it makes it much harder for you to enjoy their work. So I think in general, yes, it's one of those things that, like when you're watching a horror movie through your fingers, that you can, if there's an artist you particularly like, a writer you particularly like, you can, just by the vibe of a headline, work out if you want to read something about them, or from the blurb on the back of a biography. If there's, for example, I love Michael Frayn, the writer. So let's talk about Michael Frayn. If someone's written a biography of Michael Frayn, and on the back it said, an intimate portrait of one of our great artists and where he gets his inspiration from, I think, great, I can read that. If it says, well, I think we all thought that Michael Frayn was a good guy, but let me tell you, I think, well, I wouldn't read that, by the way.
Oh my God, the Daily Mail used to have a
that.
Saturday, almost like a recurring Saturday feature that would always begin like, he was beloved by millions. And it would be like, it would be, honestly, people, it's not literally Michael Palin, but it'd be like... Yes. People you wrote, Derek Nimmo, whoever it was, and then they just absolutely, but what that hid was, and you think, do I actually want to? The thing is, I do tend to always want to know, particularly if they're in the past, because it's slightly fascinating. It does inform their work. And, every now and then you kind of read something and you think, I'd rather have not known that. I do think that silence is sometimes the most intriguing statement of all. And there are people like Kate Moss who never spoke And then suddenly when she started giving interviews, it's like, oh, I think you... nothing you've said at all is remotely interesting. And actually, when you never spoke and we didn't almost know what you sounded like, and you existed as an enigmatic and chameleon-like image, you were much more interesting than when I had to listen to you about talking about moon baths and taking, this or that in order to sell your product range. Something like that is... They're often with... I mean, you're talking about Dickens or whoever it was, or Orson Welles was talking about Dickens. The further you go back, the less we know. So we're always kind of on fairly safe ground with the with much older writers who are long dead.
I think writers is particularly tricky because the whole job of a writer is to get out of your way. The whole job of a writer is not to be present in the text. That's the gig really. With an actor, you sort of they're very in your face anyway, and that they'll often play roles that have sort of some sort of weird moral duality or something. So it's less of an issue. I think sometimes with writers, the less I know, the better. I love Ian McEwan, for example. That's one of the few examples where if I read an interview with Ian McEwan, it sort of adds to how much I love his work, because you can tell how much he feels it and how interested he is in the world. So I can sort of see there that I like to read about that person. But yeah, I think that the job
aren't there some where you just think that there's something about the law around them that's actually indivisible and that adds to, even if they're sort of monsters, or very difficult. I think of someone like Truman Capote or Patricia Highsmith. I mean, Patricia Highsmith was really a monster. But I love knowing all of that.
Yes, that's a very good example. I think because of what she writes, though, it really ties into that, the sort of, she writes very well about evil and difficult people. And you think, oh, that's good. At least And someone like Donna Tartt, where the very fact that she's quite enigmatic and hides away really adds to the sort of books that she writes as well. But I think it's I think there are definitely examples where you think I love this writer so much I do not want to know about them just in case. I think that would be my role. Actors, directors, and stuff. I think it's slightly different. I think writers is a particular thing because they give so much of their heart and their
I'm
soul
different.
to you.
I don't mind knowing it all with writers, whereas with actors, I think I wish I didn't know that you'd said that. Sorry. I mean, just that can be difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I suppose oftentimes when you're reading about writers, you are possibly reading about them through their own lens, and you would hope that they would express themselves in interesting ways, even when they're telling you about themselves, which maybe is less so with musicians or directors or something. It's a really good question.
Yeah.
I'm going to be thinking about that a lot.
Me too.
Margaret Barnsworth, hello Margaret, has a question for you, Marina. Well, I suppose it was a question for either of us, but it's been apportioned to you by the sorting hat. Margaret says, with all the military conflicts going on in the world right now, is there a shortage of military equipment that Hollywood productions can use to film TV shows and movies? Well, I mean, talk about keeping it topical, Margaret.
I think she probably wrote that before there were even fewer pieces of hardware available to film productions, if I can euphemize what's happened over the last week. Actually, funnily enough, we also, this is relevant to our interest because we have the second half of our Top Gun bonus episode for members, which involves a lot of borrowed military hardware and the various conditions attached to it. Remember, you can be a member at therestentertainment.com. Okay, let me talk to you about how this works. In the US, it works differently in different countries, but primarily, I will talk about the US. The Department of Defense has something called the Entertainment Media Office, and the various different...
EMO?
EMO, yeah, they didn't call it that.
Sure.
And wouldn't get the joke. Yeah. And they cut deals with film productions, with Hollywood, and they will lend things. You have to sign, if you borrow existing military hardware, you have to sign something called a production assistance agreement, and there are tons of restrictions. And you have to submit your script for review. They're not allowed to do certain things with it anyway. But they operate under what's called a mission first policy. So no surprise if they need it, whatever you're using for your kind of military romantic comedy. If they need it to actually, bomb a country, they can take it back. Yeah, they can.
What's that called again?
The Pentagon, it's called Mission First policy.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe that something's more important than showbiz? Anyway, in their eyes.
Mission First
The Pentagon
policy.
always comes first. The Department of War, as I think we now have to call it. And they can revoke the agreement at any time. So after 9/11... all sorts of things were suddenly recalled from film productions for Operation Enduring Freedom. which obviously, as you know, endured for quite some time,
Yeah.
not the Freedom. For Top Gun Maverick, part of the reason that took actually a long time to get filmed is because there were lots of equipment delays because they had so many really, really high-end pieces of kit, primarily planes. That pushed that back a while. Transformers, where, obviously the military...
Robots in disguise.
Robots in disguise.
By the way,
restricted.
I hope that's not a spoiler for people.
No.
Yeah. Do you know what? That genuinely, I've never thought of that. The very slogan is a spoiler.
Yes.
Transformers, robots in disguise. Just say Transformer.
Just, yeah.
And go,
I wonder what this is
I
about.
wonder what you mean. Look at this car.
Yeah.
Hold on. It's not a car. Yeah, I knew already because you'd said Transformers, robots in disguise. I knew it was a robot in disguise.
But you didn't know the character of Optimus Prime, did you? And you didn't know... Yeah,
I suppose so.
They've got a magic stone. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it.
Aren't we all sort of robots in disguise in a funny kind of way?
Wow, make you think.
Yeah, it does make you think.
Transformers, if I can get back to the point at hand, robots in disguise, that became restricted because they needed hardware for Iraq and Afghanistan.
A car that turns into a robot, or a robot that turns into a car?
Yes. No, okay. I'm sorry to break it to you. The US military is involved in the fight against the Decepticons. I can't believe I'm getting into this. Look, can I just get about onto this, right?
Yeah.
So there were also private rental companies.
I'm so angry about the Decepticons.
I know, so we all are. We're all really furious.
Absolutely boils my blood. Anyway, listen.
Right, okay. Yeah. So for Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, the crew of that were allowed on the USS George H.W. Bush in the Adriatic Sea, but it was on active duty at the time, so if any sort of real world anything happens, you just have to go. You're never in control of this, and everything, you have to gear your production around the military. Also, by the way, it doesn't have to be war. It can be a disaster response, hurricane, whatever, anything. The war in Ukraine has significantly impacted the industry. Mosfilm, which is Russia's largest film studio, they had to donate lots of their prop tanks from the backlot to be used by the Russian military to bolster their armored vehicles.
Can you imagine a grimmer meeting?
No, well, it's not really a long meeting, is it? You are donating your kit. Yeah. Okay. Lots of productions have had to move out of Eastern Europe, which, remember, before this was a particularly attractive, parts of it still are, but a particularly attractive filming destination. The most famous, of course, in some ways, is Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola, making up Apocalypse Now. He struck a deal with Ferdinand Marcos, the Philippine dictator, to borrow their military helicopters because he needed loads and loads for Apocalypse Now. And I think it was $100 a helicopter per hour. And the Philippines was under martial law at the time. But Marcos was simultaneously using those helicopters to put down an insurgency. So when the Filipino pilots would fly onto the set every day, they'd have to quickly helicopters would have to be quickly repainted in in US colours, and then sometimes they would just be pulled off the set and they would have to go back. But Marcos did it because he thought it was prestigious. And Imelda went to set. Imelda, well, Marcos's sort of dreadful wife, went to the set and asked Coppola to the palace. But primarily he did it because it allowed him to be paid in hard US currency, which was appealing to him. So yes, it really affects things. And there will be things that, because of what's happened in Iran, lots of things will have to be kind of recalled, pieces of kit, things you wouldn't imagine were particularly even pieces of kit, which is why some people like to just kind of fake it like that. I don't know if you saw that Alex Garland movie Warfare, which they shot off. It was an A24 thing, which I think they shot that somewhere off the M25, which is about a sort of SEAL team raid that goes wrong in the Iraq War in 2006 during the insurgency. They created all those vehicles. They would not have been allowed to use them because the film is essentially quite negative about the whole experience, as it were, although it's supposed to be sort of like a real-time thing. But they wouldn't have been, that you would not have got that script approved at all. Oh, I'd like to actually know the answer to this question from Scott Clapperton, who says, Richard, what are the top 3 TV quiz shows that you wish you'd created?
Oh, God. Well, so there's 2 parts to that, Scott. One is creatively, that I wish I had, or that I could have, if that makes sense. Certain things happen. Like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire came specifically out of a radio thing, and I couldn't have, I could have come up with a format, but it wouldn't have been Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So it's something that I admire and that I could have had the opportunity to do, but that also I wish I created that were insanely lucrative.
I was going to say, is that going to be one of your things? Yeah,
I think it has to be.
They're very rare.
Because
Okay.
otherwise, come on. So number 3, I'm going to talk about one that I was sort of involved with, but I didn't come up with, which is £1 Million Drop.
Yeah.
A £1 Million Drop. I remember the first time it was come up with by a brilliant guy called David Flynn, who's still making great shows now. And the first time he showed it to me, I thought, that's so great, so clever the way you sort of put your money across the different answers, and you've always got to leave one clear. And it had that money ladder thing, but it had this extra level that I love a format where there are just no moving parts. Once you've got it down, it just works and works and works. So many shows, you have to constantly go, oh, but hold on, if that happened, then I have to fix it in this way. And suddenly things get complicated and you've got 50 different lifelines and this, that, or the other. Lifelines are almost always because there's something up with the format. But
really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so £1 Million Drop, I think it's great. The only thing I did on £1 Million Drop was I said we should play it for £1 million. Which, that's, I think, what people think TV executives do. And on that day, that is what I did, which is the most obvious thing you can do. Because I loved it so much and we were going to pitch it as a daytime thing.
Yeah.
I said, oh my God, but it's such a great mechanic, that thing that Dave came up with. I was just going, but imagine you had £1 million there.
That's cool. Yeah.
That was the limit of my thinking on that one. But I loved that. The second I saw it, I thought, I wish I could have thought of that. Why did Dave think of that? I could have thought of that. Even more so, my number 2, which is Weakest Link, which is the idea essentially just voting people off. And that's all you got there, and that's something that I did with Survivor. So I had that in my head anyway. It was I loved quiz shows, and I had the idea of voting people off, and I didn't come up with the weakest link, and that's made billions and billions and billions of pounds. And again, it's once you've got it, it just runs forever and ever and ever. It is slightly complicated because of the banking and and this round we take 10 seconds off, but we add this extra money to someone once said with Weakest Link, the genius of it is you can explain it in one sentence, which is such nonsense, because it's actually quite complicated. But the heartbeat of it, the drive behind it, which is we start with X contestants and each round we lose someone. How you play those rounds that's different, but just that idea. And also it's got a huge flaw of it, which is, of course, you vote off the weakest link until the end when there's 3 of you, when you always have to vote off the strongest link, because otherwise you've got to play against them in the final. But, that's okay. That's on my list because I really, really could have thought of it, and it made so much money. So I think it really scores highly in those two.
Your dream piece of self-flagellation.
Yes,
then.
Exactly. Whereas my number 1 is something probably made a lot less money than those things, but I just think as a format, I love things with polling and stuff like that. I would just love to make this show because it feels like the easiest show in the world to make, and you can make it forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And it's Family Fortunes, or Family Feud as it was in the States, because it's really, really, really watchable. It's beautifully watchable. It's endlessly replicatable. I mean, you're never ever going to run out of things on Family Fortunes.
And it's dynamic and living.
It's dynamic.
It responds to
exactly
100 people would have said something completely different 10 years ago. Exactly
that. And it has the beauty, to me, game shows are all about play along. That's what we've always tried to do in, House of Games. It's all about watching at home. And that, like the 1% Club now as well, everybody sitting at home across the generations can play. The second you say, name, the top 5 things you find in a bathroom, everyone can play that. And the joy to me of game shows is bringing, you either do your university challenges or Only Connects, and that's like the Olympics of quiz shows. But if you're doing a quiz which is inclusive, which everyone can play along, something like that I think is the dream, which is it requires thinking. It means you can be competitive with the person sitting next to you. You can be 80 or 40 or 12, and you can just do it again and again and again and again, and you can do hundreds of episodes, and you can sell it to every single country in the world. But it's just a simple thing that brings joy. So I would say that the one I wish I'd come up with, that I would have sat and been happy for the rest of my life, would have been Family Fortunes.
I could listen to you on game shows all day long. I really could. Okay, well, I certainly can't top any of that. So we're going to wrap this episode right now. As I say, we have got this second half of our Top Gun special bonus for members, which is join at therestersentertainment.com. Otherwise, we will see you next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday.